Let me start off. For some of you, I think most people know what the term flow refers to. I've gone back and recently reread the original studies and the psychological work around that term. And basically, it's finding where you are so energized by something, you're so happy, you're just in this state of flow. And what that means, or what we're referring to when we say flow, is you love what you're doing. You have purpose, you have passion. You might forget what time it is. You might forget to eat lunch. You look up at the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much time has passed. And you get totally into what you're doing. So that's the state of flow that we'll be referring to when we talk today. We're going to talk about how to tap into that, why a lot of people aren't feeling that way right now, why people are feeling more off balance today than ever before, and how you can reconnect and recharge at work, ultimately to lead to more profitability, to lead to more innovation, and more productivity as well. So what are some of the challenges of being in flow today? One of the biggest is that we're tuning into things that actually drain our energy. One of the biggest is our devices, our laptops, the different phone calls. Every 6 minutes on average, we're checking our devices. And every 24 hours, we're exposed to up to 10,000 ads. So what's happened over time, there's a psychological effect, and there's an effect with our attention span, where literally a goldfish has the attention span of 9 seconds. And an 18-year-old human, an American human 18-year-old, has an attention span of 8 seconds. So a goldfish actually has more attention span, a longer attention span than we do now. And we are driving this process where we're constantly distracted, we are constantly drained, and especially the particular things that we're tuning into can bring us down. Now, what I mean by that, because we're made of energy, and Peter, feel free to jump in on the chat if there's anything you'd like to add to this, because he's an energy expert as well. Because we're made of energy, the higher vibe we have, the closer we are to flow. So when you're in a happy, engaged, energized state, you have a higher vibe. And that's why they call it things like they're enlightened, they're transformed. These are energetic terms that describe being in flow, being happy. And so over time, we're tuning into things like COVID has a lot of uncertainty, it has a lot of fear, and those are low vibe things. And if we don't protect ourselves, and if we don't find a way to stay in a higher state or closer to flow, then we feel things like being off balance or disconnected. And you've heard people saying these things since COVID, and you've watched them walk away from their jobs by the thousands, by the millions. 67 million people have left since last year. So feeling this way that we do, burned out, off balance, disconnected. And 40% of those who left their jobs say that the biggest reason was burnout. It's making us unhappy. The majority of people say that they are unhappy at work. And even the World Health Organization, it classified burnout as a syndrome. So it's serious. One of the other factors laying into this and affecting our ability to get into that flow state is the PTSD from COVID. And there's research that shows it's not like a one-time event, like maybe a hurricane or something tragic that happens that you have PTSD from, because we don't know when it's over. We think it's over, and then it starts again. And so studies are showing that it could be more severe PTSD as a result of COVID. Getting your head wrapped around the fact that in the year 2000, the entire year of 2000, the technological change now happens every 30 seconds. I mean, it's crazy to think every 30 seconds there was an entire year's worth of change now compressed into that. And so the change is accelerating faster and faster and faster, and our minds can't keep up. Our energy can't keep up. And so we feel fatigued and off balance and disconnected. And it's costing us money. It's costing us our health. It's costing us money as organizations and as individuals. And so those are the key reasons why we think it's really important to figure out how to get into flow and how to stay there. So why should companies care about it? That's what Sebastian's going to talk about. From a global perspective, why does being in flow matter?
Yeah, thank you, Tabitha, for kicking us off. I think also there's a lot of people here who are consultants, coaches, and work with organizations. And I think flow is a nice term to uncover a bigger piece of the puzzle, so to speak. There are elements that we know with different wordings that other companies know that indicate flow, and such as employee engagement. So Tabitha and Human Insight have been researching also where people naturally contribute to their energy, to their talent sets, etc., so they can link their natural talents towards the output which is needed to perform in an organization. It's as simple as that. But there are different elements that we can measure, of course, like companies with high employee engagement are 20% more profitable. There are different researchers looking at that aspect. There's also aspects like highly engaged workplaces, so 40% lower absenteeism, difficult word to pronounce. And lastly, purpose-led organizations are 10.5 times more profitable. These are all little tiny pieces of looking at a bigger, broader puzzle whereby organizations basically are made of people, and people together, they leverage, of course, performance, and they work together. And there is kind of a work ethic, there is kind of a habits and loops, etc., that people behave in a certain way that deliver performance. Now, the interesting thing here is that you and I and everybody here in the call, just think about this. Whenever you walk in a company, just think about it, and you look around and you see the office, you get a good sense of feeling of the energy in that room or the entire organization. And that kind of flow, is it good or bad? It depends. You can feel that. Well, the interesting thing is we research from a human insight perspective. There's also a scientific model that helps us to understand where you are as an organization. And I'm doing this with my hand because I'm trying to replicate an SCurve. And Tabitha, if you can go to the next slide, please. This is a slide which I stole from Peter, who's in the call here as well. But we've added to it, to the equation. And it's interesting to see here that within every organization, it goes through different phases of an S-curve. And the S-curve is a very simple biological model to understand where something grows like a plant. You put the seed in the ground, you give it time and attention, the right fertile ground, etc. It grows up and it becomes a more adult plant. And all of a sudden, at the end of that, it will give, hopefully, if it's an apple tree, some apple fruit to bear. And it's the same with an organization. So I'll explain this image where you're looking at. So what we see here is the S-curve with certain seasons plotted along that in the different phases, from winter, spring, summer to fall. And the interesting thing here is you feel energy within the world as well. And that energy we can see in the different seasons we actually have. And the best people in the world that do that correctly are farmers, of course. They, in the wintertime, they prep the grounds before they can go to spring, of course, planting new seeds, prepping the ground, prepping the earth, etc., moving towards the springtime, making sure that, well, at least the preparations are being made to go to summer so that the seeds are put in the summertime, crops can grow, and in the harvest, of course, in fall, you can harvest. And the interesting thing here is that you can also see that in the same within organizations, whereby a startup is very vision-led, has an idea of where to go to the market. But the thing there is it's missing a clear repetitive structure. It's missing rules and regulations where it can extract value. So looking on the left side of this image, you see investments and also costs, so to speak, and also harvest, so the earnings you can make. So at the beginning of the growth curve, you're investing a lot of time, energy, and money to make something out of nothing. But as long as you're going upward the growth curve as an organization from startup to scale up, you're moving towards newer phases, creating more structure in the organization, also harvesting more potential, creating more cash flow for your company. And within these different phases, there is also a dynamic because it's always moving. And what I mean by that is the energy of the company is always moving to head in a certain direction. And that's where it gets very interesting to look at what we've researched is people have a natural tendency on the growth curve to contribute to a certain area. So they literally contribute to, or the beginning of the growth curve, the middle or the end. So if you're aligned very well, and that's what we're looking for within companies and organizations, alignment of your talent set within the organization context. So if you're a startup and you're contributing at the beginning of the growth curve, your energy is aligning well. But you also know that if you want to grow the company, you need different talent sets, you need different people who bring different energy literally into the company to help it move forward into the next step. Now, just to finalize this element is at the beginning of the growth curve, you see a lot of, there's an optimum here. It's like vitamins for an organization, the vitamins that we need to have a strong vision, a clear picture of where we want to move towards. But the thing is, it's lacking cash, it's lacking structure, it's lacking the repetitiveness of creating something which is valuable for customers. So once you're moving upward the growth curve, what we see is we're creating more structure, we're creating more processes around that exploitation side of the business. And what that lack of structure at the beginning is, it's vitamins, your vision driven, norms and values are very important. That's where a lot of people will find your energy and will create great stuff together. At the end of the growth curve, that's gone down. Those norms and values are being replaced by norms, regulations, procedures, because it's focused on feedback loops. It's focused on extracting that value and making sure it stays the same. And there you see that the procedures and regulations, they kill that energy within organizations. It's literally a sort of poison that kind of takes away the positive energy of companies. So what we've seen now, and that's why we've been working with Tabitha as well, as she's going to explain with some stories that she's seen in real life cases, is where energy aligns with the energy of people, aligning the organization with people's talent sets, but also aligning different result areas that you're responsible for. Now, can we just go to the next slide, Tabitha? I'll ask the
Yes, and I would, if we could, just pause here for a moment and see if there are any questions, because there's a lot to digest in this particular slide. And I think there were 3 points you touched on that would be important to listeners and observers. One is that it could be used to map an individual's preferences. So each of us has a preference along this curve where we are naturally energized. And then secondly, you could map teams, because if we mapped everyone on this call today, on this webinar, then we would show people all across this spectrum that would complement each other. And so the goal is to find leadership teams and teams that have the right mix or blend, that they include different types of people that are energized in different ways. And then the third thing that you explained, and I love the way that this slide is laid out with the investments and the harvest to the left-hand side, this can be used for companies. So startup companies would be down there where Spring is, just starting and scaling up. And then the companies that don't make the leap, like if you take Blockbuster, for example, they did not jump onto a new curve like Amazon did, which went to the web. They stuck with their business too long in winter and ended up dying. And so this is a complex slide, and I just want to give people the opportunity, if they have any questions or comments, to chime in for a second.
If there are any questions, no.
Then we'll move on.
Yeah, we got some professionals on the line as well, so that's good. So one of the questions I'll have for the group here, you can use the chat, is imagine a culture in flow. could just think about it. So a culture and flow, an organization that you've worked for, been a part of, have visited, or are coaching, consulting, developing, you name it, or even know from the news. What does that look like? Can you describe the elements, the words that pop into your mind now in your head, and write them down in the chat? And let's see where we get to, what people are saying. I see Janneke saying loads of creativity, initiative. Camilla saying cooperative, yeah. Work-life balance, yeah. High on psychological safety, failure can be an option. Yes, I like that one. High productivity. People aren't as worried about ownership and hierarchies. Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Will. Emotion. You have to explain that one, Miriam.
Yes, explain that. What do you mean?
Well, I got to think about it because it's motion and emotion. Which I mean is when you ask people to use their mind, they start thinking about things. But I believe as well that if you have a feeling, it makes you do things. So it's like in an organization which is in flow, people know this. They know that you get moving, you get literally in motion by emotion.
I love that. We do a lot of purposeful transformation work, and so much of it is based around purpose and passion. And I hadn't seen the term written in that way before. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Peter says they are aware of the meaning of the why. Contagious enthusiasm. Alrighty.
I like that. I like that. That's better than my stubbornly optimistic term. It's interesting, back to Peter's comment, understanding the why. That's one thing that we've learned in recent years, I guess, since Stanford started doing the design thinking process, where in the old days, we would just start straight away to brainstorming an idea, and we assumed we actually knew the problem. And now it's really important to back up and understand and empathize. Is that even the right problem? And so asking people and interviewing them. And it's funny, the largest employer of anthropologists in the world is Microsoft now, because it's so important to understand why people do what they do. And it's something that data can't tell us. Data can tell us people buy a certain thing. It can say the what, the who, and the how, but to get the why, you really have to have empathy and get to know people. So that kind of ties back in with the emotion comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. Yeah. And I see also a very, the words have been chosen are very genitive as well, very nice, high productivity, work-life balance, etc. But I also have one question for the other group. I want to flip it as well. So could you do the same exercise and now think of companies that are not in flow, that you've worked for, come across, helped, consulted, engaged with, and can you describe the characteristics or the words that you feel are best used to describe the emotion and feeling that you got while you were there? Let's see what pops up for the rest of the group. And then we'll move over to this slide, Tabitha, to finalize. Having to over-explain an approach is tiring. Solo and loneliness, own kingdoms within the organization, yeah. Emotional chaos, that's an interesting one, Trent. People are gossiping and not working on islands, or are working on islands, yeah. Like pushing the rock up the hill every day, static, feeling work is piled on endlessly. it's interesting to see the kind of words. Everybody knows the words you are facing with. It's very easy it comes just to it. Oh yeah, these are the words that I feel. A lot of silos, power, structure, hierarchy, bureaucracy, no support. Interesting. So if we know what the places where we want to work for versus the place we don't want to work for, how come that a lot of people are still working in the place that we don't want to work for? And how come it's so difficult to change that space? Well, there's a lot, of course, that we see, that we research. And can we just go over to the next slide, Tabitha? Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do, what we've researched, what we've learned is our approach, and the goal that we are trying to do is, the goal is not to change people, it's to help people adapt to the change. And it's really around that space of knowing where your natural contribution lies, knowing where the natural contribution of your colleagues lie, and is that in line with the elements of work that are being asked from you? That's one. Two, placing that in the context of the ecosystem where you're a part of, so the organization that you're working for. And is the phase of the organization, like a startup, a scale-up, or corporate, is that in line, of course, as well with your own energy that you're bringing? And I think, Tabitha, have you got anything else to add to that one from your perspective?
No, I think it's just that change itself also fits in with the laws of energy. If you have a change, a lot of times you're positioning your view in one direction, and a lot of times people come back, like in this cartoon, and they don't have budget, they don't have resources, they don't have time, and so you end up having this equal and opposite reaction. Whereas if you know where they want to go and you can accelerate it, like this poor guy with the wheels, at least you're adding momentum to something that is already moving, and you could get it along a little bit faster.
Yeah.
So taking the information that Sebastian had about companies and individuals and what companies look like that are in flow, you have to break it down to the individual level. And how do you personally find your flow and sustain it over time? Well, your intuition is your own personal guide to what energizes you, to your purpose, to flow, whatever you want to call it. But your intuition is what lays it out for you. And people like Einstein, Oprah, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, they have attributed their success to intuition. But how can we hear it? You know, go back to the things we were talking about. We're checking our devices every 6 minutes. We have endless emails. The news is on 24/7. We've got so many competing things for our time that we have trouble hearing our intuition and finding out what is this flow and how do we get there and how do we sustain it over time. Well, first of all, learn to recognize your personal cues. It's different for every person, but these are some examples that are pretty common. You might be humming or singing subconsciously. I tend to do that, like if I'm eating something that I really love, like my mother's blackberry cobbler, I will find myself just humming, and you don't realize you're doing it, but you're so happy, you're in such a high vibe state that you might be smiling, you might be singing or humming as you're going along. So if you catch yourself doing that, or if someone says, "Oh, you look chipper today," think in that moment, stop and think in that moment and jot it down. What am I doing at this second? Why am I feeling this high vibe state? And what you want to do is find those things and document those so that you can use those as waypoints to have this purposeful journey and sustain that feeling. Another way that you might recognize it is goosebumps. If you're listening to music that really raises your vibe and someone hits an impossibly high note or does a complex riff on the guitar, you might get goosebumps. So that's something you could get from being in flow. an elated feeling in the gut. You know, if the bride is walking down the aisle, or your favorite team is about to take the ball field, or your last minute shot goes in and you win a game, like that elated feeling, recognize when that's happening, because those are personal cues and everyone is different. But when you become familiar with your cues, then you can stay in that state longer and longer over periods of time. One method that I read about that I love to share with people because it's so easy is to kind of, because we're so busy, we can trick ourselves into not overthinking intuition. So what will you do is, if there is a problem you have or something you want to know, how do I really feel about this? And it's funny because I've worked in industries like investments and engineering most of my career. And so feel for me is like a 4-letter word. It is a 4-letter word, the 4-letter F word. But so a lot of times we just push our feelings, to the side over time, and it gets really, really hard to hear them. And so if you come up with a question, should I take this job or not? Should I hire this person or not? Should I ask my boss about this? Whatever question you have, as long as there's a yes, no answer, then take a coin. Yes is heads, tails is no, flip the coin. And as soon as it lands, in a split second, you're going to feel one of two things. You're either going to feel elated, like, yeah, it's heads, yes. Or you're going to feel, maybe I should do 2 out of 3. And if you're thinking, maybe I should do 2 out of 3, or if you hesitate, that's a no. And so your intuition is there. And that's one little tip that I like to give people to help you find it and start listening to it. And if you practice with things like that, might sound trivial, but it does lead you to what excites you, what is your intuition, what are your emotions about that? Not to steal your term, but to steal your term, because I love it. Then follow a purpose about which you're passionate. As Sebastian said, companies are 10.5 times, according to the Harvard Business Review, more profitable on average that are purpose driven. And so understanding your purpose or your company's mission, or it could be social improvement, any type of purpose. But if you can feel some sort of purpose or passion, it will drive you closer to your flow. It will raise your vibe. And those are the things that keep you going on a more sustained basis. One of the things that I want to mention about purpose, leaders, young people, college students, I hear it all the time that they're stressed out because they don't know their life purpose. And people will go on retreats. They will, go live in the jungle for 3 months like I did to try and clarify your purpose, but you do not have to do that. All you have to do is break your purpose into little waypoints. You don't have to figure it all out all at once. The way that you're going to find your flow and sustain it for the longest period of time is to choose little waypoints that make you happier. And what I mean about that, let's say I'm in a job working in IT, and I'm doing some mentoring of young people that come in. And I love that part of my job, but I hate doing the reports at the end of the week. Then I use opportunities or set little goals, like I want to start mentoring more young people. I want to start a young leadership program at this company. Anything that can steer you in the direction incrementally of what you love will help you align with where you are naturally stimulated on that growth curve. So finding the things that you love and then finding the ways to do more of them, that's how you keep it sustained over a long period of time. One of the ways to measure is with the Aimcube. And this is a tool that many of you are familiar with already. Human Insight has this. And at Epic Pivot, we have worked with a lot of organizations with the tool. And basically what it does, it's different than psychological tools that just talk about how I feel. And those, everybody says, how is it different than DISC or PI or Strengths Finders or Myers-Briggs? You know, those are very common tools to discuss how we communicate with each other. The Aimcube is different because it's about ontologically, how do we move? How do we get into action? How do we contribute to that curve? And go back to, you know, as Sebastian said, we're all made of energy. You can feel the vibe when you walk into a company. And so how do you participate in that? So it's the only tool I'm aware of that can really show you how you are energized, how you can fit into flow in the best way. And there are 3 different axes that they use to identify how people are naturally engaged. One is it's akin to the SCurve, which is about exploration versus optimization. Some people love change and don't mind risk, and others are really good at finding risk. And we need both. Another axis talks about, are we relationship focused, people focused with our attachment, our preferences, or do we prefer content and things with that? And I don't want to get into too much depth here because it's a complex model, just giving a high level overview. The third axis is about specialization versus generalization. Like you might have a general physician that can diagnose a little bit of anything that might be wrong with you. Or you might have a heart surgeon who knows everything about the heart, but he may not be the greatest to ask about your big toe or something that doesn't relate to the heart. And so those are the 3 axes and how the tool kind of works. Our conversation today with flow is really centered more around that exploration and optimization aspect of the tool. And this is some information that we took from a TED Talk. And Sebastian, do you want to talk a bit about how they placed the people where they did on this curve?
Yeah, sure. So this was some research done by some partners of ours at New Jersey Institute of Innovation by another namesake of mine. He's called Don Sebastian. He's not the Don, but his last name is Sebastian. So
hey, Meek, do you know anything about 812 North 34th Street?
I think somebody should be on mute that is not. So check your mute.
Like somebody's ordering pizza. So
or buying real estate, you know.
Or buying real estate, yeah. So during this TED Talk, what they did was they researched interviews of Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and Pierre Omidyar, and they looked at kind of went back to place, okay, the words that these people use, the words in interviews, what they could find in literally video footage, where would they place their contributions based on the growth curve? And they asked a kind of peer group to do that. And that's where these are the average weighted positions of that peer group to analyze and go through the interviews, look at the text that these people used, like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. And then these were the results.
And each of us can identify with one of those areas along the curve. Each of us are energized in different ways. And finding the one of these that is most relevant to you is really important because you can align the role you're doing, the job you're doing, with what you love to do. And so this is kind of a fun activity. If you want to put in the chat, which innovator is most like you, the way that each innovator gets into flow, just pop that in the chat.
I see a lot of Edisons, inquisitive, that's Harvey Firestones, some Edisons. Between Edison and Firestone, of course you are, Miriam. Not a problem, Tonya. Pierre Omidyar, Firestone, Ford, and Omidyar. Okay. for my son as well.
I always think this is really interesting to see where people fit and who you're most like. And I love that sometimes people think that only big idea people can be innovative. And that's not true. We just innovate in different ways. And so it's really interesting to me that some of the, best innovators that are known for creating, new things are actually up there, stabilizing and making things efficient, like putting things together in a different way because you think from a different frame of reference. It's just interesting. All right, so let's move just quickly and we'll close out then and leave time for questions into your team. We talked about each of us and where we are, but let's think about our team dynamics and how being in flow, if you're missing an area within your team, how that relates to real life business execution. This is an example of an optimization driven team. So people were really good at scaling and efficiencies. And this team would be great at things like engineering or maybe accounting, programming, scaling up companies, operations, doing those types of things. And yet this team was made responsible for creating a never done before mobile app, go invent something that hasn't been done, a custom job. And I need you to do it like yesterday because of COVID, this retailer had to implement something really fast. And so you took people that were looking for efficiencies or risk and then said, okay, blue sky, go figure it out, invent something quickly. And it didn't work so well. They had a 1-star rating and it just wasn't working out. Consumers didn't like it. And they were overly engineering it. They kept making it more and more efficient. And so the users weren't getting what they wanted out of it. And we did this analysis and highlighted that, hey, you might want to add some team members from things like marketing or customer service or user experience to your team to get a different perspective. Your enterprise architecture group, people that naturally are at the beginning of this curve. And once they did that, within weeks, they went to 4.6 stars rating. So it took getting that balanced team and matching what the team strengths were to the objective at hand in order to maximize their flow, to maximize the task at hand. And we have the opposite example here. And this was a Fortune 200 organization we worked with. And this was a complex problem they had where they were trying to make their distribution process more efficient. They were unable to keep their product in stock at certain retailers. And this was a problem that had gone on for over a year. And they could not resolve it. And the reason was they were given these boundaries of you have to use the existing manufacturer, the existing distributors, the existing retailers. So they had a lot of things that they had to consider that were already existing or from the past. The people here on the growth curve are energized by thinking into the future, thinking creatively into solutions that have not been done before. And so they were struggling to find a better way, a more efficient way to make this happen. And what we did once we saw this analysis is said, hey, let's get some people from your Southeast region. This was more the Northeast region that were up here and were optimizers and stabilizers. And once they did that, it only took a month to solve the problem. So these are examples of, look, these are two Fortune 500 companies that had opposite problems, but by finding where their team is now and knowing what the situation required at hand, they were able to accelerate what needed to be done. So just kind of summing up what we talked about today, Working in flow is a way to maintain greater positivity. It's a higher vibe. And so it feels better. You feel more energized. Doing things that drain your energy, it leads to distraction and burnout. And burnout is a huge reason for people leaving their jobs in the mass exodus today. Company cultures that are in flow, they have higher productivity, greater innovation, and increased profits. We're in flow when we're following our purpose. So it's really important to use your intuition to find that purpose, and then stop stressing yourself out about figuring out your whole lifetime purpose. Just follow your waypoints of what makes you a little happier, jot down those things that you're doing when you find yourself humming subconsciously, getting goosebumps, having some of those cues, or flip your coin if you can't hear your intuition, so that you can tell how you really feel about something. And the more you practice those things, the better you'll get at sustaining life in flow. And then consider measuring your personal, your team, your company flow. Consider graphing it out somehow to create a company that can optimize their performance. So I'm going to leave it there for a bit and take any questions at this point you all might have.
Well, I think I have a question to kick us off, Tabitha. With the two groups that that we've done this for the Fortune 500 companies, did you also, what were the wordings that the teams described when they were, for their feeling, underperforming? What was the wording kind of when you got the team in the meeting room?
The team in the meeting room, that, are you talking about the example teams, what they were feeling? Yeah. Or?
Yeah, the example teams, yeah.
So let's go back to those slides. This team that had optimizers was feeling really frustrated. They felt like people that were the consumers really weren't getting it because they were making something as efficient and optimized as they could. And so they felt like consumers just must not get it. They're all over the place. And so they felt very frustrated. And then they felt better once there were other people that came in and said, well, this is what people might be looking for. And so that helped. In this situation, it was a little bit different. They felt confined and held back. They felt like, you asked me to solve a problem and now you're giving me all these constraints. And so they felt frustrated in a different way, that they could not be creative. They could not think out of the box, which is what energizes them. And so they almost wanted to just take their ball and go home or not work on it. I mean, it took over a year and they still hadn't solved it because it didn't stimulate them.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting to see the two differences, and also the wordings that they use are almost two sides of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
My question.
Yeah, go ahead.
My question is sort of like the flip side of that. Once they got the team diversified cognitively, what was the feeling of the culture? Did they report back on did they feel happier?
It's interesting how that works, because you tend to want to hang out with and be buddies with people that are on the same spot along the curve. And so it seems like things are easier to get through because you don't have the diversity in thought. And so I wouldn't say that they were relieved that the problem was done, but anytime you bring in a full diverse group with different ways of thinking, it adds tension to the process. So sometimes it may not be more fun, but everyone, as business people, they understood what was happening. And of course, we talked to them about the energetic dynamic that's happening with working with people that are opposite of you. But overall, happy that the problem was solved.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And you find that we do double-blind experiments in workshops, and we have one activity where on one side of the page, we'll say, okay, do as many different uses for this pen as you can in 2 minutes. And we set a timer. And the people that are along here, naturally, those groups, this is double blind, so they don't know that they're in like type groups. They'll excel. They'll do really well in those rapid innovation, rapid ideation projects because they're stimulated by that. They might fill the whole page and have 100 ideas in a couple minutes. And then the people at the top may not have as many because they're thinking through them. Well, why would this is a dumb activity. You have a pen that has a use. Why would you do something different with it? So they're trying to make it more efficient, trying to make it make sense in their existing frame of reference. Then we flip the page over. On the back side of the page, it says, pick one of your ideas and take it through these 5 steps of operationalizing it. So, what would your market be? How would you scale it up? What are the efficiencies that you see in the future and things like that? And your people that are down here they'll struggle. They'll still want to be creating more opportunities on the front side. And they'll also struggle to pick just one because there's so much opportunity they see in their ideas. It's hard for them to pick one. Whereas up here, they would tend to pick one, they're pacing out their 2 minutes that are expiring, watching the clock, and they'll get through all 5 steps. And so later in the day, we split teams up by diverse preferences. And when we do that, they all tend to go up. That's been our primary research so far, that both innovation overall, new ideas, and the getting through all 5 steps on the back go up because you have a balance on the team that can pull from each side. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think we also have some follow-up questions, Tabitha. One remark from Miriam stating that, do you by any chance know of the book Fully Charged? How great leaders boost their organization's energy and ignite high performance?
No, but I'm going to check it out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you care to elaborate, Miriam? You probably have read it or are known.
I'm busy reading it.
Okay.
But it's research done by, as far as I know, only maybe already 2 decades ago with a German couple, and they are one of few who've actually researched energy. If you just get in an organization, you just step in and you feel what kind of energy is there. And I thought of it because I feel there is a lot of interesting overlap. So that's why.
Indeed. We'll check that out. Thank you so much.
And there's keep us posted, Miriam.
Yeah, for sure.
And a question from Sebastian Hamers saying, hi Tabitha, may you share what the starting point of the discussion has been? Did they come with a specific problem or just that there is something wrong and we are losing money? Sebastian, do you want to elaborate on that one as well?
Yes, thank you very much. My point is, what was the initial point when you came into the discussion? Was it that you still had to work out in which direction you wanted to go, or was it already some clarity in the company that said, well, we might have there or there some problems? Thanks.
They were different case studies. So I'll take the retailer first, that had the new consumer mobile app and had the optimizers. With that organization, we did a leadership program and worked with their executive team and then the directors and then the managers and team leads. And so the majority of people who worked with others, everyone was touched in some way and understood the Aimcube framework. They understood aligning what you're really energized by with the role at hand. And so they had an understanding of that first. And so they came to me with the question, this is not working. Do you have any suggestions? And so that's when we pulled their specific graph and said, oh yeah, you're missing anyone down here. So there's a gap. And based on that gap analysis, we made some mid-course corrections. The other company, however, had been having the problems in advance, and they had the problems, as was documented there for, over a year. And so once we did the training, went in and did a workshop, they then recognized, oh my gosh, I wonder if this will correlate to that. And so their problem was in the past, but they used the new information to go back, and we did a graph specifically for those decision makers and sorted it out.
I have a question.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mark.
So as you know, when you're hiring people, it is usually it is an emotional decision. It is usually based on the chemistry. So I totally agree with this model, and I'm also a fan. You may be familiar with the Gallup work and the Gallup path, where they advocate that you assign roles according to people's strengths, which is very similar to what you've been saying.
Mm-hmm.
How difficult is it to convince hiring managers or business leaders to hire people or assign roles when they're moving people either within the company or bringing people inside the company, to assign those roles according to that particular person's talents rather than the chemistry between the hiring manager or the politics? Because sometimes hiring managers would go for the weakest candidate because they don't want to be challenged.
Yes.
So how challenging is that?
It's very challenging, because an example is that Fortune 200 organization that we worked with, for example, they had the exact same HR overall. They had the same rules at corporate, and yet the Southeast region was skewed in one direction at the top of the curve. The Northeast region was skewed at the bottom of the curve. So all the regulations were the same, but the hiring managers were practicing those things, which you tend to hire who you like and who you have chemistry with, exactly what you're saying, being in resonance and in sync. And so they, had these two very different regions that resulted, and it was an aha moment for the global HR director to see that, because, they think that they're hiring a balance of people, and it's a subconscious bias. It's not something you're actively thinking about. And so that's a really good point, Mark. Companies need to think about those things and look for balance in their partnerships as they go.
Yeah, from a practical point also, Mark, that's what we see when working with companies. There's also, we need to get this done quickly, preferably yesterday, or yesterday, not tomorrow. So there's always a presence of, we need to get moving. Let's go. Let's hire people. Let's go to work. But it's like top sports. It's like organizations. They're professional athletes. Professional athletes prepare themselves. They have a coach. They have a developer. They look for their diet. They look for everything. So our main argument there is, why don't you look at it more from an objective element and not just from a subjective gut feeling element? And why don't you, why don't you focusing on getting a statistical validated element of looking at your team? What are the talent sets? And what would this mean if you were to hire this person? What talent sets would he bring into the team as well? What kind of energy is he bringing? And that's a different conversation to have. But once they see the benefits of it, like Tabitha has done with these two Fortune 500 companies, and the CHRO or the HR global says, oh my God, I haven't seen this before. They kind of embrace it and they use it. It's still very difficult to go through, because it's not the easiest conversation to have every single time, of course. But if you do it diligently, follow a structure and process, it does reap its benefits.
And starting with the individual, having people understand, and you can do that at hiring. You can understand where that individual sits, and where a role sits, And you can see if that's aligned or not aligned at the very beginning. You can also look at people that are disgruntled in their roles and see, you know, if they might be in a place that's opposite of where they naturally sit. So we are out of time, but we are available for questions afterwards. If you want to reach out to either of us individually, give us a shout, and we're happy to provide more information and answer any other questions. Thank you, Sebastian, for your help today.
You too, Tabitha. Thank you for today and the rest of the group.